Hey everybody, this is a section from the chapter Marxism and Existentialism on the Philosophy and Theory of Jean-Paul Sartre 1. This is a huge chapter, and I'm breaking it down into smaller videos just so it's somewhat manageable. The last video is called Alexandre Koyré. This section is titled Hegel and the Problem of Time. Okay. Hegel and the Problem of Time. The problem of time in Hegel's work can be reconstructed by examining three texts that exhibit certain overlappings. Footnote. Apart from a cursory mention, no reference is made here to the concept of time in the logic. This is for two reasons. The concept of time in the logic plays no real role in Koyré's account, and the concept of time in the logic is far more complex than the aspects cited here. Explaining time in Hegel's logic would therefore go beyond the scope of this study. End footnote. Back to the body. In his Jena logic, Metaphysics and Philosophy of Nature, Hegel discusses the concept of motion. In doing so, and in contrast to the Cartesian view, Hegel proceeds from the premise of the infinite ether as a reflected form. Time is conceived herein as a mode of being. Time and space and time are regarded as a necessary interconnection, a necessary relation, and thus as the reciprocal sublation of the simple boundary. This leads to the following consequence. Quote, this, namely, that the boundary is not immediately present within itself, and that this non-being is opposed to it as the active principle, or rather, as that which constitutes the in itself, that which exudes its own opposite, is the future, and against this, the now is powerless to resist, for the future is the very essence of the present, which is, in truth, the non-being of itself. End quote. Hegel. The future, therefore, sublates the present. Consequently, here too, neither the present nor the future exist independently. Rather, the present and the future exist solely as the quote, relation of the one to the other. End quote. Hegel. In contrast, the past appears as a state of rest. If the present is conceived as the quote, negating simple boundary, end quote, vis-a-vis the other two moments of time, then the past is, quote, time turned into itself, end quote. The now has received its content from the future and has thus become, quote, the immediate opposite of itself, end quote. The past then emerges as the sublation of these moments, a real time. A cyclical process is thereby established. Yet as an infinite entity, time contains within time self a totality that itself becomes an element of this very motion, the unity or in itself of these moments. The third element, that which time holds in itself, is the quote, reflection of time into itself, end quote. That of such that the quote, once was, end quote, has transformed into a reflected quote, now, taken as a whole. Okay, there's a number of footnotes here. Footnote, see Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Jenenser Logik. How do you say logic in German? Well, I don't know, I feel self-conscious saying it. Even though I've said this word in German a million times, I don't know if it's a G or a G.
Logik.
Logik. Where am I? Okay, so Jenenser Logik, Metaphysik und Naturphilosophie, edited by Georg Lasson, 1923. And footnote. The discussion concerns the reciprocal transition between space and time, and vice versa. Quote, time and space are the opposition of the infinite and self-identical, with nature as its idea, or they are nature itself in the determinacy of absolute self-identity, end quote. They are expressions of totality. End footnote. Footnote, quote, and this posited sublation of both, and both is what? This is in reference to the sentence, the past then emerges as the sublation of these moments as real time. And those moments are the now and the future. In the footnote is a quote from Hegel. Quote, and this posited sublation of both it now and the future, I guess, is the Emmals, bracket, the once was, and bracket, time reflected into time self, or real time, end quote. Hegel. Footnote, it, spirit, parentheses, spirit, author's note, in parentheses, quote, it is like the, quote, it, spirit, is like the animal, time for itself, and likewise the freedom of time. This pure subject that is free from its content, but also master over its content, unlike space and time which are devoid of self, end quote. Hegel. Intuition and image are placed in relation to one another. End footnote. Back to the body. This aspect of Hegel's philosophy is to be supplemented by passages drawn from the text Jena Real Philosophy 2, from 1805/1806. A spiritual mode of being is conceded to the object in space as an abstract concept of existence. According to Hegel, this constitutes the realm of intuition. The task of mediation falls to the spirit. In this respect, it is here immediate. Returning from this point, it is, quote, for itself, end quote. Quote, imagination in general, end quote. Hegel. Intuition points to space. Its dimensions are explicated. While space is conceived on the one hand quantitatively, space is conceived on the other as immediately existing. Time, by contrast, appears as, quote, the abstract infinite, or the negative in itself, end quote. Hegel. When time is conceived as immanent, as, quote, relating time self to time self, being identical with time self, end quote, time is simultaneously thought of as negating. As immediate, it is simple and present. Quote, the now is. This is the immediate determinacy of time. End quote. Hegel. Yet, it is also future, and in this respect, external. The past is, quote, completed time, end quote, in a threefold sense, as a dimension, as a pure result, as the, quote, truth of time, end quote, and as totality. It becomes reflexive. A couple of footnotes here. Footnote, quote, the ether that is present in quote, the ether that is present is immediately space. The fact that space, as this simple continuity, is immediately one with the, quote, I, thereby intuition is posited, end quote, Hegel. Quote, if we hold fast to the non-being of its being, in contrast to it, bracket, the present, end bracket, being posited as existent, such that this non-being sublates it, then we posit the future. It is a, quote, other that constitutes the negation of this, quote, now, the second dimension. The future will be, bracket, means, and bracket, we represent it as something. We ourselves transfer the being of the present onto the future. We do not represent the future as something merely negative, end quote. Hegel. Its being is merely, quote, represented, end quote. End footnote. Quote, this is back to the body, quote, time perishes in the past as its own totality, ... that this is its truth lies in the immediacy of the sublation of its moments, that is to say, in the moment's non-existence. But time is nothing other than this distinguishing. It is not present insofar as its distinctions are not. It is pure mediation, end quote. Hegel. As such, it appears once again as immediate. This, however, is a different kind of immediacy, a, quote, absolutely mediated, end quote, immediacy. Footnote, quote, it alone is the substance of both, their unity, their substance. Yet as such they had not yet been posited. Rather, a moment of each fell outside the other into the other. It is duration, only within this do space and time exist, end quote. Hegel. End footnote, back to the body. At the level of absolute knowing in the phenomenology of spirit, this line of argumentation is found, in a certain sense, in a concentrated form. The initial problem identified here is that within the self-knowing concept, capital C concept, the moments appear earlier than, quote, the fulfilled whole, whose becoming is the movement of these moments, end quote. Hegel. In consciousness, however, where the whole is as yet unconceptualized, it is the whole that appears earlier than the whole's moments. Quote, time is the capital C concept itself, which is there and which presents itself to consciousness as empty intuition. For this reason, spirit necessarily appears in time, and it continues to appear in time only so long as it has not grasped its pure concept, that is, so long as it has not cancelled time. End quote. Hegel. Time is therefore merely, quote, the pure self as externally intuited and not yet grasped by the self. The concept is mere intuited, end quote. Hegel. Should the self grasp itself, it thereby, quote, sublates its temporal form, end quote, comprehends the act of intuition, and becomes intuition comprehended. Quote, time thus appears as the fate and necessity of spirit, which is not yet complete within itself, end quote. Hegel. In the logic, the following point is made. If infinity is conceived as the, quote, beyond the finite, end quote, It is a, quote, bad infinity, end quote, because quantity is the determining factor within it. In contrast to the concept of space, quote, time is an absolute coming out of time's self, a generating of the one. The point in time, the quote, now, which is immediately the nullification of that very thing, and continuously the nullification of this passing away, such that this self-generation of non-being is equally simple, equality and identity with itself, end quote. Hegel. Even though the argument derived from the logic cannot be further explicated here, it has become clear that this context differs from that of Coeuré. For Coeuré, the matter is simpler in his interpretation of Hegel. Time, conceived with implicit reference to Husserl and Heidegger, is touched by the perspective of the future, that of quote, expectation, quote, announcement, and quote, promise. The quote, theological dialectic, end quote, by contrast, is oriented toward the past. In the Nunc Aeternitas, thus there exists a quote, eternal present, end quote. That quote's from Angelica Pilen. Abstract eternity, which differs from the concrete, acquires reality within living spirit. Footnote, quote, when Alexandre Coeuré introduced the first French translation in 1931, he noted that Heidegger's, quote, philosophy of existence, end quote, marks not only a new stage in the development of Western philosophy, but initiates a completely new phase, end quote. Tom Rockmore, Heidegger. Citing Alexandre Coeuré's introduction to Martin Heidegger, QS, c'est qu'est la métaphysique. I think that's What is Metaphysics. Isn't that a Heidegger piece? Pugler also regards this new phase as an established fact. See Otto Pugler, Neue Wege mit Heidegger. And footnote. Footnote. Drawing on Gadamer, Angelica Pilen points out that Hegel is concerned with the discussion regarding the relationship, quote, between the ahistorical thinking of the Greeks and the historical thinking of the Judeo-Christian, end quote, tradition. See Hans-Georg Gadamer, Hegel und die Antike Dialektik. I think that's Hegel and the Ancient Dialectic. I'm not sure. Or the Antiquity Dialectic of Antiquity, I'm not sure. Like the dialectic of that time. I guess the dialectic in like Socrates and shit. But I'm not sure. This is likely done here to mask Angelica Pilen's failure to engage with Coeuré's interpretation of Hegel. And footnote. Footnote. See Alexandre Coeuré, Hegel, Lena. Presentation is said to be a determination of being, implying that presentation is not merely identifiable with time, but also constituted by time. Actually, I should repeat that sentence. I actually don't know what the it. There's an it here I'm just trying to follow, but I can't really actually follow what it is. Presentation is said to be a determination of being, implying that it is not merely identifiable with time, but also constituted by it. Angelica Pilen rightly criticizes this as negating the element of eternity, though it must be added here, not its quote validity within logic. Furthermore, human inner experience is identified with time, making it appear possible to replace external time with a, quote, phenomenology of inner time consciousness, end quote. Angelica Pilen, Hegel in Frankreich. Alexandre Coiré, with this turn, Coiré reverts to a pre-idealist rationalist construct analogous to the notion of an experience prior to experience. End footnote. Back to the body. The experience of time is a form of directedness. To use Heideggerian terminology, the directed moment signifies present time. Quote, for us, time does not come from, quote, the past, unquote, but from the future. ... Time forms itself by spreading out, or rather by becoming visible from the, quote, now. It comes from the future into itself within the now, end quote. Alexandre Coiré. Regarding the proximity to Heidegger, Alexandre Coiré. Hegel recognized this, for time descending from the future contains the, quote, principle of creation and the new, end quote, as Angelica Pilen attempts to render Hegel's position. Conceiving the future as creation is something transcendent. Time is conceived dialectically as eternally, quote, incomplete, end quote. Footnote, the directed moment is said to be oriented toward the future as a, quote, arrival, end quote. From the, quote, nows, end quote, from the, quote, nows, directedness toward the future, Coiré deduces, and Angelica Pilen comments upon, its, quote, constitutive significance for the experience of time, end quote. Angelica Pilen. Footnote, regarding the proximity to Heidegger's being in time, see below. And footnote, what is overlooked is that by relating time eschatologically to the future, one is in principle compelled to conceive of it as closed, meaning it fails to satisfy the requisite postulate of openness. End footnote. Okay, and that's the end of the section titled the concept, what's it? Something about time in Hegel, concept of time in Hegel. Let's go, scroll on back. Hegel and the problem of time. Thank you so much for listening.